In half an hour the Genoese was sufficiently recovered to be able to sit up and to give a full account of their presence here, and of their object in assuming the disguise of Danes. He then told the count that Edmund had intended to reconnoitre the place alone, and that he hoped he and his people would attack the town while the Saxons in their galley made an assault from the sea. The count replied that the peasantry could not be induced to take such a step. "I will, however, aid your friend," he said, "by a feigned attack tomorrow evening when he is there. This may help him to escape, and if the Danes sally out next day in pursuit, there will be the fewer for them to cope with." When Edmund awoke the next morning he found himself able to walk and move without difficulty, and with but little pain, thanks to the care of the peasants, and in the afternoon, being furnished by the count with a guide, he started for the town. When he arrived within a short distance he dismissed his guide and lay down in some bushes till nightfall, when he rose and made his way into the town, passing unobserved between the watchfires made by the parties of Danes encamped in its outskirts to protect it against surprise. Once in the town he walked boldly on, having no fear of recognition or question. Sounds of carousing came through the open casements, but few people were in its streets. He made his way down to the seashore, which he followed until he came to a large and stately mansion standing in beautifully laid out gardens at the end of the town. Several tents were erected in the garden, and although the night was not cold, great fires had been lighted, around which the Danes were carousing. Avoiding these, Edmund walked up to the open windows. The first room he looked into was deserted, but in the next, which was a large apartment, a number of Danes were seated at table. At its head sat Svea, with Freda on his right hand. Around were a number of his leading men, the captains of the galleys and their wives. The meal was over and the wine cup was passing round. A number of attendants moved about the room, and many of the warriors who had supped elsewhere stood round the table, joining in the conversation and taking their share of the wine. Edmund saw at once that he could not hope for a more favourable opportunity, and he accordingly entered the mansion, and, passing through the open door, joined the party within, keeping himself in the rear of those standing round the table, so that the light from the lamps placed there should not fall upon his face. Just as he had taken his place, Sweyn called out, "Let us have a song. Odoker, the minstrel, do you sing to us the song of the Raven." A minstrel bearing a small harp advanced into the centre of the horseshoe table, and after striking a chord began to sing, or rather to chant, one of the favourite songs of the sea rovers. A shout of applause rose from the Danes as the minstrel ceased, and holding their goblets high above their heads they drank to the Raven. While the singing was going on, Edmund quietly made his way round to one of the open windows. It was the hour at which the count had promised to make his attack, and he listened eagerly for any sound which might tell that the peasants had begun their work. Other songs followed the first, and Edmund began to be afraid that the courage of the peasants had failed at the last moment. Suddenly he saw lights appear at 5 or 6 points in the distance, and putting his head out he thought he could hear distant cries and shouts. The lights grew brighter, and soon broad tongues of flame shot up. Shouts at once arose from the guards without. Some of the revellers, hearing these, went to the windows to see what was happening, and gave a cry of alarm. "Sweyn, we must be attacked. Fires are rising in the outskirts of the town." "These cowards would never venture to disturb us," Sweyn said scornfully. "Of all the foes we have ever met, none were so feeble and timid as these Italians. But see, Sweyn, the flames are rising from 8 points. This can't be an accident." Sweyn rose from his seat and went to the window. "No, by Woden," he exclaimed, "there is mischief here. Let us arm ourselves, and do you," he said, turning to a young man, "run swiftly to the outposts and learn what is the meaning of this." Scarcely, however, had he spoken than a man ran breathlessly into the hall. "Haste to the front, Jarl," he said to Sweyn. "We are attacked. Some of the enemy, creeping in between our fires, set fire to the houses in the outskirts, and so we leapt to our feet in astonishment at the sudden outbreak. They fell upon us. Many of my comrades were killed with the first discharge of arrows. Then they rushed on in such numbers that many more were slain and the rest driven in. How it fares with the other posts I know not, but methinks they were all attacked at the same moment. I waited not to see, for my captain bade me speed here with the news." "Sound the horn of assembly," Sweyn said. "Do you, Odoric, take 20 of the guard without, and at once conduct the ladies here to the boats and get them on board the galleys. Let all others hasten to the scene of attack. But I can hardly even now believe that this coward herd intend to attack us in earnest." In the confusion which reigned as the warriors were seizing their shields and arms, Edmund approached Freda, who had with the rest risen from her seat. "The dragon is at hand," he whispered. "In a few hours we will attack Sweyn's galley. Barricade yourself in your cabin until the fight is over." Freda gave a little start as Edmund's first words reached her ear. Then she stood still and silent. She felt her hand taken and pressed, and glanced round, met Edmund's eyes for a moment, just as he turned and joined the Danes who were leaving the hall. A minute later Oderic entered with the guard, and at once escorted the women down to the boats, and rowed them off to the galleys. Meanwhile Sweyn and the main body of the Danes rushed impetuously to the outskirts of the town. The fighting was already at an end, the peasants having withdrawn after their first success. 2 or 3 of the parties round the watchfires had been annihilated before they could offer any effectual resistance. Others had beaten off the attack, and had fallen back in good order to the houses, losing, however, many men on the way from the arrows which their assailants shot among them. Sweyn and the Norsemen were furious at the loss they had suffered, but as pursuit would have been useless, there was nothing to be done for the present, and after posting strong guards in case the attack should be renewed, the Danish leaders returned to the banqueting hall, where, over renewed draughts of wine, a council was held. Most of these present were in favour of sending out a strong expedition on the following day to avenge the attack, but Sweyn argued that it might be that the natives had assembled from all parts of the island, and that this sudden attack, the like of which had not been attempted before, was perhaps made only to draw them out into an ambush, or to attack the town in their absence. Therefore he urged it was better to delay making an expedition for a short time, when they would find the enemy unprepared. After some discussion Sweyn's arguments were prevailing, and it was determined to postpone the expedition for a few days. End of chapter 18. Recording by Mike Harris.